from Brazil, and Jonathan is going to be his interpreter. So you may have to grab another chair, Jonathan. I'm going to put you and Renee at the end. I think that'd be best for you. The subject that this panel is going to talk about is the role that national coalitions play in discipling nations. So has really become kind of a core purpose of the apostolic movement is discipling nations. You hear that a lot. I think it's easier said than done, obviously. But if we're going to fulfill our mission, somewhere being able to influence a nation, disciple that nation, obviously is what our role is. If you look up on these screens, just so you'll understand more clearly the structure of ICAL. The ICAL is a collection, a collaboration of national coalitions. And what we've tried to illustrate there on the screen is the ICAL logo just being whatever central administration that we have. And all of those arrows point to what amounts to national coalitions. But you'll notice that those national coalitions are grouped under what is called continental coalitions. And basically, that model that you're looking at represents somewhat of the vision of ICAL. We are not there yet in all the nations of the earth. We are not there yet having a continental collaboration, but that is ultimately the goal, to be able to administrate and organize ICAL around the world, as you see, in 5 or 6 continental, quote-unquote, areas. And within that continent, then you have the nations in that continent, each having their own coalition. And that's kind of a breakdown of how the vision and kind of the structure of ICAL is, at least in theory at this point, is going. And I put that up there. Some of you have probably seen that slide before and you're familiar with that. However, we every year have new people coming in, and we cannot assume that everybody understands what we're trying to do. So joining me up here are 3 national conveners. Joseph Adafarison is in Nigeria. He is the convening apostle of the Nigerian Coalition of Apostolic Leaders. Besides him is Joe Matera. And Joe is the convening apostle for the United States of America. And on the end is Renee Terranova, and he is the convening apostle for the nation of Brazil. So we're going to give them about 10 to 12 minutes each to answer the question, imagine that, how a national coalition, what role they play in discipling that nation, and they'll kind of unpack that for 10 to 12 minutes, and then I plan to close out our time with asking them some questions. I want to do a little impromptu interview, and no, I didn't give them the questions beforehand. So they're going to be as surprised as you are with the questions. So first of all, Joseph.
Let me get straight to the point. In Africa, a lot of people expect a religious organization to deal with spiritual solutions to problems. But our coalition has come up with a very practical solution, and it is spiritual. So I want to talk about a very audacious, a very ambitious project that the Nigerian coalition has just recently launched. But before I can talk about it, I need to give you a little background of a little historical background of the situation in Nigeria. Now, Nigeria has a population of 180 million people. We're the most populous nation in Africa. Indeed, 1 in every 4 Africans is a Nigerian. 1 in every 6 black people worldwide is a Nigerian. Wow. So it's like we're in everybody's face. Yeah. Our population when we became independent in October 1960 was 60 million. So in 57 years, we have risen to a population of 180 million, and it's still rising exponentially. Nigeria is not made up of a homogeneous population. We have at least 200 distinctly different tribes in Nigeria who speak over 500 different languages.
Wow.
One thing that one might say is that we negotiated our independence from Britain, but we never negotiated our interdependence with one another. Okay? So what has happened from the time of independence is that we've had fractures in our national life. People, different tribes have the fear of being dominated by other tribes. There's the fear of, I think corruption, as a matter of fact, comes from this fear of domination. Because if somebody gets into office, he wants to take everything and develop his part of the country, and he wants to make sure that there's nothing left if somebody from another tribe gets in there. Okay. At the same time, there are tribes, there are towns and villages in Nigeria that have perpetual daylight. This is hard to imagine, but they're in oil-producing areas where gas is flared 24 hours a day, so they don't have night. They breathe toxic air. Nothing grows in their soil, and most of them are from fishing communities. No fish in the waters. And these, Nigeria's oil-producing areas are generally in minority tribe areas. So they watch the wealth of the nation being used to develop other parts of the nation and not their own part of the nation. Over the last few years, there's been an increase in the agitation for a devolution of power from central government to the regions. Okay? And one of the challenges that we have is that governments are frightened that if we ever sit down to talk, Nigeria will break up. And Nigeria's breaking up is not an option. No nation has survived 2 civil wars. We've had one because of a breakup. Okay. Now, our coalition realized that there must be some national discourse. We need to sit down as different peoples to discuss our way forward, to negotiate with one another. It's inevitable, it has to happen. We see it coming. And so we, as a coalition, had a press conference about a month ago in which we introduced a project that we've started. This project is to project or to introduce to Nigerians the concept of non-violent communication. I don't know how many people have heard about this concept before, but it is a concept whose pillars are self-empathy, empathy, and honest self-expression. Self-empathy means being honest in identifying one's own needs. Empathy means being reasonable in recognizing the needs of others. And honest self-expression means expressing oneself authentically in a way that is likely to inspire compassion. We've introduced the concept publicly, and the next step is for the leadership of our coalition to make high visibility visits to government, senior government officials, to leaders of civil society, to leaders in the legislature, to go to as many leaders of thought and pound this principle that we must follow non-violent communication in all our dealings with one another. Let me give you a little example. You're driving along the highway and somebody cuts you up. If you wind down your window and shout an expletive to him, you haven't solved the problem. What you need to do is non-violent communication. Do you realize that you risked my life when you did that? Now, non-violent communication is a concept that is alive and well. There's several books that have been written by a gentleman called Marshall B. Rosenberg. He's talked about non-violent communication. We need to introduce it to our leaders at every level in our nation, and then we need to hold right across our nation seminars and workshops teaching people the principles of non-violent communication. Now, this is a Christian coalition that is doing this work because we feel it's important that we get involved in what's happening in our society. This is very bold, this is very audacious, but when we sat down, considered it, prayed about it, we realized that for our coalition, it helps us to take the high moral ground. If we can take the high moral ground, we build for ourselves a platform through which we can speak into more issues in our nation. Okay? We need help. We need people that understand the concept, that can come and help us with the seminars and workshops that we're planning. And it's going to cost a bomb. It really is going to cost a lot of money. So as many as are willing to come and join hands with us, because if we can solve this problem, this Nigerian problem, it's a problem that you will also find in other African countries at different levels, and varying degrees. If we can solve it in Nigeria, we can solve it in the rest of Africa. It's something that the church has been called to. Thank you very much.
Next is Joe Matera, and he is our convening apostle for the United States.
Yes, thank you. So, in terms of actually discipling the U.S., I would say Brazil is a lot further along. Rene, what he's doing in the Brazilian coalition in terms of practical, political, economic solutions and movement in actualizing that. I would say that at this point in our seminal situation when we're just a few years old, in terms of our methodological approach, we would understand first and foremost that the gospel has to be applied in culture. The gospel is applied in culture by the local church on a local level, which would be, I would call that the modality, where local churches, and when I say local church, I'm including marketplace leaders in the context of a local church or region, are doing something in their community. Then we have the other dynamic, the modality, then is united with a sodal expression, which is where ICAL comes in. The sodal is the extra local or regional influence, transcends a local church or a business, and it goes out of the community into, or just their local area, into something that is greater than that. And just to collapse it down to something practical here, even though our local church was a big part of transforming a community of 160,000. We first started in 1981, half of the community was abandoned buildings. I saw kids shooting each other. I saw little kids dead on the streets, and we did a lot of different things, street meetings, door to door, hundreds of deliverances every year. And we started a nonprofit, an NGO, with over 500 kids every week coming out. And my wife directed that and started that as a separate entity from the church. So within about 10 or 12 years, we saw, without gentrification, it wasn't because poor people were pushed out, without gentrification with the same ethnic group, we saw a total transformation in our community. And so what we're doing at USCAL is we're trying to highlight champions in 4 different levels of, that would express our mission. One would be the first R of the restoration of the church to the way of Christ and the apostle. First and foremost, if we don't restore the church to the New Testament biblical pattern, whoever we send out to politics and culture will mimic the same dysfunction they see in the church. So that's why we have the first R is the restoration of the church. If you don't have that right, you're not going to get anything else right. The second R is reconciling ethnic leaders and different movements. The United States obviously has had a big challenge in modeling ethnic unity. I don't call it racial reconciliation because we all come from one human race, from Adam and Eve. I don't buy into the evolutionary racial divide because it implies that some are more evolved than others in the species.
That's good.
So I believe in ethnic reconciliation, and that's our second R. That also means reconciliation between movements. Why? Because if we don't unite the evangelical church, whether they're in the Roman Catholic, Episcopal, Orthodox, Pentecostal, because they're evangelical leaders and or people in all these frameworks of Christianity. If we don't recognize those we're called to work with, especially those in the apostolic, irrespective of their ethnicity, then we're not going to capitalize on the incredible gifts that are out there. One of the things I've noticed in studying church history, I've never read this, but when the Western church and the Eastern church divided, it did not affect Christianity because we still had, and I don't buy into this thing that the Middle Ages were the Dark Ages. The Middle Ages actually is the greatest example in church history of a Judeo-Christian worldview dominating the ethics of a nation and discipling nations. If you rip that out, even though they lacked a lot of individual personal restoration, you rip that out of church history, you don't have a model for discipling nations. When the Reformation came, it resulted in now we have 30,000 denominations. So we went from Christendom to Christianity. Why is that? Because John Calvin's view of church government was A, they believed in independent churches, and B, they believed in a pastor and a teacher, but they took away the office of bishop, which would be the apostolic succession. The reason why when the East and West divided, the church really didn't get greatly impacted, it was still dominating nations, was because it was only the apostolic office that could keep the church together. When John Calvin ripped that away, we had nobody to keep the church together. So part of how we're going to be a voice in Christendom is to restore the church to the apostolic ways. The apostolic church, but also recognizing the apostolic function. So I believe that we have to start there. We have to have unity, the God-centered unity, which then obviously we want to believe for revival and we want to believe ultimately in reformation. But to have a focus on politics and economics, when you have a dysfunctional church, all you're going to do is export your dysfunction. Wow. So my personal main call is to the church, including marketplace leaders. However, some of us are called to the political realm in our council. Guys like Jim Gallo, Harry Jackson, Dennis Peacock, they're called to some of these systems. It's not one or the other, it's doing all of it together. It's theology and culture. If you just focus on the church for 100 years, you're going to have a church that's insulated and irrelevant. So you have to have, as part of the discipleship process, a way of raising up gatekeepers who are serving their community, and then all of these gatekeepers coming together at a national level, i.e. ICAL, to have a sodal and a modality and a sodality in terms of our influence. So that's what ICAL is about. We're getting champions that have great influence in their communities. We're not doing corporate mission together. Right now it's a little too complicated to do that, except for some fundraising with hurricanes and all that. We raised 20 grand to help with that. But we will eventually do that. But right now we're highlighting what everybody is doing, and we're building our network together so that we could do some national things together. And I'll close with the 4 primary models for discipling a nation or transformation. One would be the humanitarian model. That would be the world vision model. You could dig wells in India, but they're still praying to Hindu gods. But they would call that transformation because they improve the quality of life. You have the community development model that was led by John Perkins, a dear mentor to me in the 1990s. And they'll go into a community and they'll provide vehicles for job creation and buy buildings and do whatever they can to develop that community. Incredible incarnational model. Then you have the transformation model echoed by George Otis Jr. That would be when a handful of people get together and pray until revival comes, and then revival winds up breaking out and affects every level of society. 4th model would be the Reconstructionist model. That was championed years ago by Rusas Rushdoony, others of that ilk. And a lot of our theology is based on a kingdom understanding of Scripture, biblical worldview. Their model is basically, if you have the right theology, you're going to wind up having gatekeepers raised up, homeschooling, right universities, whatever. However, we found that model fails if you don't combine it with revival. What is our model? The kingdom model. Kingdom model combines all of the above. We want to be humanitarian. We want to incarnate the gospel in terms of scratching where the neighborhood is itching in a practical way, providing practical needs, starting NGOs. We believe in prayer and fasting, revival, signs and wonders. You can't do it without that. We believe in having an understanding biblically of applying the gospel to culture. That would be the Reconstructionist model. The kingdom model has everything. We do theology, we do the spirit and power, we do humanitarian, like what Doug Stringer is doing, and we do the incarnational model of community development, moving in and transforming a community in a practical way. So we're on our way, we're converging, we're uniting, and I'm excited over the future of ICAL. And eventually, I don't know if it'll be in the next 5 years or the next generation, we will have a hand in discipling our nation. Thank you.
Amen.
On the end is Renee Terranova from Brazil.
Bom dia a todos.
Good morning, everyone.
É muito bom estar aqui com
It's
vocês.
very good to be here with you all.
Eu recebi uma missão muito ampla do John Kelly
I received a very big mission from
há
John
7 anos
Kelly.
atrás.
What?
7 anos atrás.
7 years ago.
Para cuidar dos países e comunidades de língua portuguesa.
To take care of the countries that speak Portuguese language.
E nós temos 23 pontos no mundo que falam português.
And we have 23 points or places in the world that speak Portuguese.
E o Brasil é um país continental.
And Brazil is a continental country.
Ele está na América Latina
It's in Latin America.
e é o único país que fala português.
And it's the only country in Latin America that speaks Portuguese.
Mas dentro do país
But inside of the
se
country,
fala mais de 180 dialetos
there's more than 180 dialects
entre as comunidades indígenas.
between the Indians community.
É muito difícil se locomover no Brasil.
It's very difficult for you to move in Brazil.
De onde eu vivo no Amazonas
Where I live in the Amazon,
até você chegar no Rio Grande do Sul,
until you go to Rio Grande do Sul, that's a state
são
in Brazil.
9 horas de voos direto.
It's 9 hours of direct flight.
Então é um país muito grande.
So it's a very big country.
Que tipo de estratégia poderia ser usada para consolidar um país que tem 27 estados?
What kind of strategy can you use to consolidate a country that has 27 states?
O maior estado tem 37 milhões de
The
habitantes,
biggest state has 37 million of inhabitants,
que é São Paulo,
São Paulo.
e o menor estado está chegando a 5 milhões, que é Sergipe.
And the smallest state is getting to 5 million, that's called Sergipe.
Eu vivo no Amazonas.
I live in the Amazon.
O Amazonas é um estado muito amplo,
The Amazon state is a very big state.
2.000 quilômetros quadrados por habitante.
2,000 kilometers by inhabitants.
Então eu tenho uma dificuldade na minha mão para resolver.
So I have a very big problem and difficulty in my hands to solve.
E o John Kelly me entregou essa missão há 7 anos atrás.
So John Kelly gave me this mission 7 years ago.
Mas eu já trabalhava no Apostólico há 19 anos.
But I was working already in the Apostolic movement for 19 years.
Conhecia a coalizão,
I knew the
Peter
coalition, Peter Wagner,
Cindy Jacobs.
Cindy Jacobs.
E eu fui levantado apóstolo há alguns anos atrás
And I was raised an apostle several years ago
pela ICAL.
by ICAL.
E
Back then it was called.
eu funcionava nos bastidores.
And I was working in the back room,
Mas como o meu ministério
in the
cresceu
backstages.
muito
But because my ministry grew up a lot,
e nós começamos a dar cobertura a 3.000 apóstolos
and I started giving a spiritual covering to 3,000 apostles
e 35.000 pastores.
and 35,000 pastors.
Não somos uma denominação.
We are not a denomination.
Deus me deu uma palavra.
God gave me a word.
Não faça a mesma rota dos comuns,
Don't do the same route as the common people
que fortalece o seu reino pessoal
that strengthen their own personal kingdom,
e enfraquece os relacionamentos.
but they weaken the relationships.
E Deus me proibiu a fazer denominação.
And God forbid me to do a denomination.
Uma potência na mão,
I had a big potency, I had a big power in my
mas
hands,
uma ordem do céu.
but I have an order from heaven.
E eu comecei a trabalhar em rede,
So I started to work as a network,
porque as igrejas do futuro têm que trabalhar em rede.
because the churches of the future, they need to work as a network.
As denominações serão engolidas,
Denominations will be swallowed,
as igrejas de rede serão
but
consolidadas.
the churches of networks will be consolidated.
É a visão para o futuro.
It's the vision of the future.
Então, abrir igrejas de rede.
So open the churches of networks.
Criei uma rede de relacionamento
I created a network of
e
relationships,
peguei pessoas desacreditadas.
and I started picking up people that no one believed in them.
Intensificamos o discipulado,
We intensified in the discipleship,
formação de caráter,
the formation of character,
os princípios bíblicos,
biblical principles,
raciocinar por princípios
thinking by principles,
e como criar estratégia de atingir os 27 estados.
and how to create a strategy to reach the 27 states.
Nós temos 5.700 cidades no Brasil
We have 5,700 cities in Brazil,
e nós chegamos nas 5.700 cidades do Brasil
and we reached the 5,700 cities in Brazil.
com a visão de igreja em rede.
So with the vision of a church as a network,
Em cada cidade dessas levantamos um líder.
in each city we raised a leader.
Em cada estado desse levantamos um líder que cuida das cidades
In each state we raised a leader that takes care of the cities,
e criamos equipes apostólicas
and we created apostolic teams
nos 27 estados do Brasil.
in the 27 states of Brazil.
E para que essas equipes fossem
And
consolidadas,
so for that teams to be consolidated,
fizemos agendas de encontro.
we made agendas as an encounters.
Nós temos 3 agendas anuais
We have 3 annual agendas
que a gente se trata, que que a gente se percebe,
that we treat each other, that we know each other,
descobre os defeitos
we discover the misdeeds of the
e
person,
também quais são as nossas
and
potencialidades.
also the good things that are inside of us.
Uma delas é em Porto Seguro.
One of those agendas is in the city called Porto Seguro.
Porto Seguro é o útero da nação brasileira.
Porto Seguro is the uterus or the place that the nation was born.
O Brasil nasceu ali.
Brazil was born in Porto
E
Seguro.
por 19 anos estamos em Porto
And
Seguro.
for 19 years now, we're doing this conference in Porto
E
Seguro.
decidimos pelo apostólico mudar a história da nação.
And we decided for the Apostolic to change the nation's history.
E saímos dali com uma estratégia e não uma fantasia.
And we left that place with a strategy, not with a fantasy.
Precisamos entender quem nós somos no processo apostólico.
We need to know who we are in the process of the Apostolic.
Me fizeram uma pergunta.
Someone made me a question.
Apóstolo René,
Apostle
qual é
René,
mais importante?
what's more
O
important,
profético ou
the
apostólico?
prophetic or the apostolic?
E eu respondi, qual é o mais importante para um pássaro?
What's more important for a bird?
A asa direita ou a asa
The
esquerda?
left wing or the right wing?
O apostólico precisa do profético.
The apostolic needs a prophetic,
O profético precisa do
the
apostólico.
prophetic needs apostolic.
E juntos vamos voar mais rápido.
And together we're going to fly even higher and faster.
A nossa missão em Porto Seguro é profética.
Our mission in Porto Seguro is prophetic.
E ali nós decidimos tomar a nação.
And in that place we decided to take the nation.
Queremos a nação.
We want the nation.
E essa nossa decisão apostólica
And that apostolic decision
começou a mexer nos céus do Brasil.
started to move the heavens in Brazil.
Atos proféticos,
Prophetic acts,
orações com propósito,
prayers with purpose,
congressos específicos.
specific conferences.
E criamos uma mentalidade
And we created a mentality
de conquista de território.
of conquest of territory.
Queremos tomar o Brasil.
We want to take Brazil.
Hoje,
Today,
o Brasil está vivendo sua melhor fase histórica,
Brazil is living the best time in the history.
apesar de uma crise econômica.
Although we have a economic crisis,
Mas
but
a crise econômica da nação
the economic crisis of the nation
desplugou do político.
left the political round.
Então, nos últimos 12 meses,
So the last
a
12 months,
economia do Brasil começou a subir de
the
novo.
economy of Brazil started to go up again.
E nós do apostólico
And us in the apostolic,
estamos envolvidos nisso.
we are involved in that.
E você pergunta como?
And you ask how
Um homem de Deus
a man of God
se levantou da nação
raised the nation
como resposta das nossas intercessões.
as a response to our intercessions.
Esse homem
That
ele
man.
está liderando a Lava Jato,
That man is leading an operation called Lava Jato,
que é uma estratégia de prender os corruptos da nação brasileira.
that is a strategy to put in jail the corrupt people inside of the Brazilian
O
nation.
Brasil tem muitos tipos de pecados,
Brazil has several types of sins,
mas o pecado da corrupção está deixando a nação nua.
but the sin of corruption in Brazil is leaving the nation naked.
E nós precisamos parar isso.
And we needed to stop that.
Quem tem autoridade para fazer isso?
Who has authority to do that?
O apostólico.
The apostolic.
O apostólico foi para o Congresso Nacional.
The apostolic went to the National
O
Congress.
apostólico foi para o Senado
The
Nacional.
apostolic entered into the Senate.
E o apostólico entrou nas áreas políticas
And we enter in the
do Brasil.
political spheres in Brazil.
Como resultado disso,
As a result of that,
nós demolimos o principado da corrupção.
we demolished the principality of corruption.
Nós demolimos o principado da corrupção.
We demolished the principality of corruption.
Poderosos no Brasil estão presos.
Powerful people in Brazil are arrested now.
Milionários no Brasil estão presos.
People that were millionaires in Brazil, they're arrested
Bilionários
now.
no Brasil estão presos.
Billionaires are now arrested.
Políticos poderosos, linha de frente da nação brasileira, estão
Powerful
presos.
politicians that were frontline in the nation, they're arrested
O
now.
apostólico mudou o status da nação
The
brasileira.
apostolic changed the status of the Brazilian nation.
Só foi possível
That was only possible
porque entramos nas cidades,
because we entered the cities,
nos estados
the states,
e no Congresso.
and the National Congress.
E criamos um partido,
And we are creating now a party.
o Partido da Reforma.
It's called the Reformation Party.
E esse Partido da Reforma
And the Reformation Party
está fazendo história.
is doing history now.
No próximo ano,
Next year,
nós vamos lançar o nosso presidente
we're gonna send our president
e
for the
vamos
elections.
lançar o governo do justo.
And we're gonna release what we're gonna call the government of the
E
just.
esta é uma conquista visível
And that's a visible conquest
do manto apostólico que está sobre
of
nós.
the apostolic mantle that is upon our
Nos
lives.
próximos 5 anos,
We believe that the next
o Brasil será outra nação
Brazil is going to be another
e
nation,
seremos reconhecidos
and we're going to be recognized
nação apostólica.
apostolic nation.
Wow.
Thank you. I have more time, but no need now. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so I wanted to ask these gentlemen some questions, and just gave them a brief time to unpack a single thought. Here's my first question. The United States is the third largest, most populated nation on earth. Brazil is the fifth most populated nation on earth, and Nigeria is the seventh. Okay, to give you a scale, 1 out of 10 human beings on earth live in one of these three nations. And if you take China and India out of the equation, 1 out of every 5 human beings on earth live in one of these three nations. So the task of quote-unquote discipling a nation of that size is enormous, especially when you consider land mass, like maybe not as much in Nigeria, but definitely Brazil and the United States, huge land mass. So my question is, in order to disciple a nation, do you feel that it's best to try to break down geographically, or maybe in the case of Nigeria with tribal breakdowns, or even maybe with industries? You try to target industries like education, politics. How do you break down a national coalition on a level that has any hope at all of impacting such large populous nations? And any one of you can answer that question in any order.
I'll have the first crack at that. What we did in Nigeria was to start a coalition in Lagos and in Abuja, which is the capital of Nigeria. We cannot avoid having regional, I don't want to call them branches of our coalition, because if communication is key, then it makes it easier to communicate to the members of your coalition the closer you are to them. So we've got 2 centers at the moment, but our plan is to go a little further east and a little further north to start coalitions in those parts of the country as well.
So those cities would be your 2 primary cities in the nation to launch from?
Yes, they're the center of the geographical region in which they are.
Which I might add was Paul's strategy when you read the book of Acts. His major strategy was to go to population centers, urban centers, and from there impact the region. So I know you mentioned, Renee, that you have some geographical challenges across Brazil. Have you found that breaking down geographically with the National Coalition is the best strategy for you?
Sim, foi difícil porque levamos
Yes, it was difficult because
mais de 15 anos para entrar nesse território.
we took almost 15 years to
Em
enter those
Brasília, que é
territories.
o cérebro central do país,
Brasilia is the main brain
onde as
the
decisões,
center brain of the
as
country,
decisões são tomadas em Brasília.
where the decisions are taken in
Os
Brazil.
poderosos estão em Brasília.
The powerful people are in Brazil.
As mentes mais estratégicas estão em
The most
Brasília.
strategic minds are in Brasilia. That's the capital of
E
Brazil.
nós fomos para Brasília.
So we went to Brasilia.
Nós enviamos senadores para Brasília.
We sent senators to Brasilia.
Enviamos para Brasília líderes do Congresso.
We sent leaders in the Congress.
E entramos nos lugares mais estratégicos ali da nação brasileira.
Entering the most strategic places
Nós
of
estamos lá
the Brazilian nation there.
Estamos lá como apostólicos.
We entered that place as apostolic.
Agora, que aconteceu para esse milagre se manifestar?
What happened for this miracle to manifest?
Nós fizemos uma ligação de coalizões
We made a
apostólicas.
connection of apostolic networks.
Os líderes apostólicos venceram o seu orgulho.
The apostolic leaders, they overcame their pride.
Milagre.
That's a miracle.
Milagre.
That's a miracle.
Cada ceder a sua parte.
Everyone was willing their part.
Fomos para retiro espiritual.
We went to a spiritual
Só os
retreat.
líderes apostólicos.
Just apostolic leaders.
E começamos a conversar normalmente.
And we started to talk, just easy talk.
Terminou em avivamento,
Ended in revival,
pedido de perdão.
asking forgiveness.
E aí nos unimos. Porque olhamos no olho do outro.
We unite each other because we look into each other's eyes.
Tiramos as nossas diferenças.
We took our differences out,
E Deus fez um milagre.
and God made this miracle.
Nessa unidade,
In this unity,
nós estamos decidindo o histórico político da nação.
we are deciding the political history of the nation.
Quando o apostólico se unir na sua nação,
When the apostolic united is going to unite in your own nation,
sua nação muda.
your nation is going to change.
É um milagre.
It's a miracle.
Derrubar as fortalezas do orgulho.
To overcome the fortress of pride,
Porque nós somos orgulhosos.
because we're very prideful.
E o orgulho e a soberba
And pride
são a profecia para a queda.
is a prophecy for you to
Mas
fall.
a humildade é a rota para a honra.
But humility is a route for honor.
E em Brasília,
In Brasilia,
estamos tendo êxito
we're having the success
por causa da unidade apostólica.
because of the humility in the apostolic.
Good. Good.
Let me just also say that I preached in Punta Segura for Renee a few years ago, and preached for, I don't know if Wally or Joseph, but I call you both. And let me tell you, they're both outstanding leaders with amazing influence and coalition. So I just appreciate both of them. They're two of my favorite people in the whole world, and they're doing amazing jobs. I believe that for a nation like the U.S. to be discipled, most likely that you're going to have a cataclysmic event or a deconstruction before reconstruction can take place. There's got to be some kind of, and I'm not a doom and gloom guy, but I believe the nation is so entrenched and there's so much polarity that either some kind of cataclysmic event, whether it's, I don't even want to say what it could be, you could use your imagination, I don't want to speak anything in the air, that will humble this nation so that you'd have like a 9/11 kind of thing where in New York City, well, maybe across the nation, we had Easter Sunday attendance for 2 weeks after 9/11. Something like that would probably have to happen. Not 9/11, and I don't want that to happen. This is, live here, going all over. It's not what I want. I'd rather the nation repents. But God could use, or somehow something could happen to deconstruct before we can reconstruct a nation. That being said, to me the best approach is always starting local. It has to be localized revival, reformation, region by region, and then as you do that, you build out, and eventually you can permeate a whole nation. And the other thing we have to really understand is I'm always trying to think outside of the box. The word disciple and nation, what does that really mean? The word nation means a people group. It can mean that we can disciple subcultures. We can disciple baseball players. We can permeate all of Major League Baseball, all of soccer, all of architecture, all of science or philosophy. In other words, to disciple a nation, you have to identify the primary, not only the gatekeepers, but the primary subcultures in the culture. So if you look at the whole nation, it's really impractical. You have to start. It would be like trying to build a house, looking at the blueprint without also starting on the detail. You have to start somewhere in the foundation. So I think we have to redefine what we mean by nation. Ultimately, yes, we want to disciple our nation, but we also have to identify the people groups that we have influence with in our local region and begin doing that. In New York City, I had a tremendous amount of influence in my community, and I can tell you, the kind of stuff that we were doing. Then the whole state, with the body of Christ and political leaders and all that. So the point is, if we can get the champions together who have great influence in all of the people groups that, are important, And we do have a lot of those champions in ICAL. If we can just converge together, share notes, pray together, and do best practices together, in a few years we can do some big damage. But let's start locally, in my opinion.
And that's very good, Joe. Joe brings up a great point too. That needs to be some object of maybe consideration. Is that nations, ethnos, really means ethnic groups.
Yeah.
And the first century concept of a nation was not geopolitical boundaries. Like somehow magically you go from one nation when you cross the boundary into, say, the United States and Canada. And so nations to them had a completely different context and definition of what it does today. So even the command to disciple nations, as you well point out, needs to be considered. Now, what we just heard here, and then I have another question, is there's two different things that can happen. One is a geographical breakdown, but like Joe is saying, this is more of a people group breakdown. The important part is that it's broken down into pieces, but what kind of strategy God gives you for the coalition that you're a part of could be different. It could be a geographical breakdown. It could be to break down maybe in people groups or industries or something like that. So those are excellent answers. Now, my next question is just give me one answer, 1 point on this. And the question is, what do you see as the biggest hindrance in your nation? And that may be hard to boil down to a single answer on that. But what do you believe in your context in Nigeria, the United States, and Brazil? What is the number one biggest hindrance that you have got to overcome in order to create a coalition that is having national impact?
One word: Islamism.
Islam.
Church captivated by consumerism, materialism, that doesn't make disciples.
Yep.
A desonra no caráter dos líderes que se dizem homens de Deus.
The dishonor in the character of the leaders that call themselves men of God.
Wow. That's sobering, isn't it? I really believe that any reformation we're trying to launch or trying to recognize as launch will only go as far as our prayers will take it. And when you gentlemen put these three things on the table, my first thought is I want the intercessors, and hopefully your intercessors and people in this room. By the way, we shouldn't outsource our prayers to the intercessors. Amen?
Amen.
So let's all of us pray, especially for these issues that you find maybe your nation has those issues or others. So my next question is about next generation. We hear a lot of people in ICAL, I hear it every year, I've heard it through the years, that we really are in need of a next generation impact with quote-unquote apostolic and some of our philosophies and worldviews and our visions to be passed on to the next generation. The question then would be, in Nigeria, the United States, and Brazil, in your coalition, not necessarily in your local churches, but in the coalition, is there something that you could do to try to make sure that the next generation is able to participate in what we're doing right now?
Yeah, you're doing Futures Live.
Yeah. Yes. Investir em jovens.
We need to invest in the youth.
Nós precisamos levantar jovens apostólicos.
We need to raise apostolic young people.
A nossa mentalidade de relacionamento
Our
com
mentality
jovens
of
é
relationship,
muito corrompida. De relacionamento com jovens.
our mentality of relationship with the youth
Não acreditamos nos
is
jovens.
corrupted. We do not believe in the young people.
Há uma geração de jovens preparada aí.
There's a generation of young people that is prepared.
Eles trabalham com os dedos muito rápido.
They work with their fingers very fast.
Aonde eles colocam o dedo, tudo vem para a mente.
When they put their fingers, everything comes to their minds.
Eles estão recebendo informações muito rápidas.
And they're receiving information very fast.
Algumas com conteúdo, outras sem conteúdo.
Some of them with context and good context, other with no good information.
Precisamos acreditar nisso.
But we need to believe in
Que
that.
os jovens são hoje a esperança do momento e não
That
do
the young
futuro.
people are the hope for this moment, not for the future.
Investir na vida deles
We need to invest in their
e
lives.
treiná-los de forma adequada dentro da visão apostólica.
And train them in the right way inside the apostolic vision.
Essa é a hora.
This is the time.
Temos que envolver jovens
We need to involve the
e
young
dar
people
oportunidade para eles
and give opportunity for them
e acreditar neles.
and to believe in them.
A única forma da gente fazer com que o apostólico sobreviva
That's the only way for us to make the apostolic movement to
e
survive
ter esperança para o futuro.
and to have hope for the future.
Daria até uma sugestão,
I want to give a suggestion here.
que a gente comece a trazer os nossos novos líderes para os jovens para a coalizão apostólica.
For us to bring the the leaders that work with us, the young people, for the coalition here,
Encher de jovens esse lugar aqui.
and to fill this place with young people.
Mas jovem, jovem.
But young people, you know.
Porque dizem que eu sou jovem.
Because some people call me that I'm young.
Não é verdade.
I'm not young. I'm not a young man anymore.
Eu já sei que eu tenho 56 anos.
I know that I'm 56 now.
E... Não, 56.
56.
E precisamos plantar jovens aqui dentro
And we need to plant the young people here
para os próximos 10 anos.
for the next 10 years.
Eu consigo ver esse lugar repleto de jovens.
I can see this place filled with young people.
Jovens de avivamento.
Young people of revival.
Jovens com fogo de
Young
Deus.
people with the fire of
Com
God.
inteligência
With
apostólica
the apostolic
e
intelligence.
com a velocidade deles
And with the velocity
para
that
a
they have
conquista de novos territórios.
for the conquest of new
Que
territories.
tal no próximo ano você trazer o seu líder
I wanna-
jovem
Maybe next year for you to bring the young person that is next to you.
ou seu filho,
Or even your child.
para que possamos aqui receber esse conteúdo
For them to receive everything that we have spoken here.
e termos até uma reunião paralela.
And even for us to have a parallel meeting here
Young apostólicos,
of apostolic leaders.
jovens apostólicos.
Young people that are apostolic leaders.
Vai ser uma revolução.
It's going to be a revolution.
E a ICAL vai ganhar mais vida do que tem.
And ICAL is going to receive new life that it already
A
has.
esperança está nos jovens.
The hope is in the young people.
Nós somos mentores
We are mentors,
e eles são a nossa velocidade.
but they are our velocity.
Very good.
I've had my two sons have preached in ICAL and or USCAL with me already. Both incredible men of God, great influence. And I believe the generation gap was a secular construct that the church bought into in the 1960s. And God is a God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not the God just of Abraham. So we have a one-generational church mindset that we're trying to push against. And one of the first things I did when I was asked by Apostle Kelly, my spiritual father, so I'd be a second generation to Apostle Kelly, was to continue what he started and giving me the baton for USCAL was, well, what are we going to do now to invest apostolically in the kingdom to ensure that we're transitioning properly? So about a year into USCAL, I met with top 4 of the top young leaders that I knew in the New York area, and I gave them some ideas of what I wanted to do, and we put together a four-point plan, and I called it the Futures Alliance with an S, Futures. And we started out with monthly calls, and that has now developed into 70, we became 70 top vetted young leaders. It was never publicized. They had to be recommended, and they were already doing apostolic work, both in the marketplace, media, or church. So we started doing that 2 years ago, and just this past Monday, we started a deep dive with an apostolic mentoring track. It's 8 sessions of 2 video meetings each, except for some of the live meetings here in June. We're meeting June 11th to the 13th, by the way, in Atlanta. So we have sessions there. So we picked 15 of the top young leaders between 25 and 40, and we're mentoring them in the apostolic and in the kingdom. We have curriculum. We have, very high-level speakers. So we're really excited because we have a real good plan, and we've already been doing this for 2 years. And Ned Merriman and Andrew Moman are the co-leaders. So Andrew Ned, you and Andrew starting to look alike, but Ned, why don't you stand up a second? So if you have any young leaders that you want to plug into the Futures Alliance, connect with Ned. It is outstanding.
Yeah, I think that is an easy model for coalitions. It's really just someone has to be recommended.
Yeah.
And we just bring in our top young leaders that are part of our ministries, our families, or whatever.
Oh, one other thing, let me just say this quickly. In order for somebody to be part of the mentoring track, they have to join ICAL. So in the last 2 weeks, we had 15 leaders under 40 join ICAL and ICAL in 1 week. So we're integrating the whole movement. They have to be here, so we're integrating everything that we're doing. And my goal is in 3 to 5 years, we're going to have half of our members are going to be under 40.
Yeah.
You have to be fiercely intentional about raising the next generation.
Yes, yes.
You have to put posterity before prosperity.
Yes.
You have to pour yourself out into the generation that's coming behind you. I brought with me 2 pastors from our church who are in their 30s because I want them to see what we do, to hear what we hear, so that they can do what we do. Okay? So, fiercely intentional.
Excellent.
I've heard, I think it was Naomi Dowdy that said, generational succession begins on day 1. Not when you're reaching the age that you think it's about time, but from the very beginning, you must be intentional about raising successes.
So I like what Apostle Kelly says when someone says, well, we need more young people. His response is very clear, very simple. Bring them.
Yeah.
Just bring them. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Just bring them. Get them in the environment. Amazing how many young people, once they get in the environment, will buy into it. One more question. One more. And it's this. When we talk about discipling nations, transformation, all of that language, what do you believe would be the first initial evidence that transformation is taking place? We don't want to claim transformation by faith. Okay? We want to see evidence. We want to see a measurable evidence that something ticked forward. It doesn't have to be a huge thing. It could be very small. But what do you believe would be a first indicator that indeed transformation is starting to happen?
I think as we become successful at transformation, we will see unity in the church.
You're speaking from the vantage point of the community. I would say what we saw in Sunset Park was the crime rate went down drastically. And then in New York City, after we started our huge prayer movement, the crime rate in New York City dropped 40% a year and a half later.
Wow.
After we had unity and we gathered thousands of people together for prayer. So the crime rate is one indicator. There are many others. In terms of the church, you have to start with unity. True, I would go beyond. Unity is just predicated on events and having a common purpose for a cause. I think we have to go to oneness. It starts in unity, but it has to go to oneness, one accord.
A transformação e reforma de uma nação,
Transformation, reformation of a nation.
no meu ponto de vista
My point of view,
pessoal,
personal,
de latino terceiro mundo,
of a Latin person of a third world country,
passo para o fim do mundo,
is a step for the end of the world.
eu diria que
I would say that
não existe outra solução
there's not other solution.
a não ser tomar a montanha da política.
There's not other solution, just the solution is to take the mountain of politics.
Se tomarmos a montanha da
If
política,
we take the mountain of politics,
governaremos a nação
we'll govern the nation.
e todos esses problemas serão
and
resolvidos.
all the other problems will be solved.
Quando a gente chega em Dubai,
When we enter in Dubai,
somos recepcionados por um letreiro muito grande,
we are received with the outdoor that says,
op the door, op the mind.
open the door, open the mind.
Se você abriu a sua porta,
When you open the door,
abra a sua mente.
you'll open the mind.
E nós não podemos abrir a porta para qualquer coisa.
And we cannot open the doors for anything.
Se nós abrimos a porta para a política, está sobre nós hoje,
If we open the door for the politics that's over us today,
destruindo as nossas famílias,
destroying our families,
nós não somos vítimas, nós somos cúmplices.
we are not victims. We work together with them.
Precisamos tomar a política da nação
We need to take the politics of the nation,
e as soluções virão para todos os outros setores.
and the solutions will come to all other
Aí
situations.
está a transformação e a reforma.
There's the transformation
No meu
reformation.
ponto de vista
My point of view
de latino.
of a Latin person.
Thank you. I would like for you, I got this red mic. I'd like for everybody here to give these gentlemen a hand and let them know we appreciate them answering our questions. Apostle Kelly, we have some guests that just kind of rolled in.
I know. I want you all to look to my left, and I want you to meet one of our matriarchs, you know, of the movement, in Doris Wagner. Give her our love. She is not only a matriarch of the movement and a driving force with ICA under her husband, Dr. C. Peter Wagner, but she's also, many of you may not realize, but she is one of the, I would say, pioneers, especially maybe even progenitor of the spiritual warfare movement among intercessors and among others. And she's making and she's helped make apostles all over the world aware of the need for spiritual warfare. Thank you, Doris, for your service, your sacrifice, and your gift to God. And before we go, the role of a coalition is to generate spiritual influence, political and economic, into a nation that comes against the Antichrist spirit. I want to make that very clear. And I do believe the church is the answer because the Word of God tells us. And so, with that said, we can talk about seven mountains, we can talk about everything else, but really, the real control is in politics and in economics, finance. That's where the real control is. And when it comes to third world nations, you have to aggressively go after the political realm. And second world nations. In first world nations, you have to aggressively go after the economic realm, because don't believe the lie that says money can't buy you everything. It absolutely can. And in nations, it can buy you a nation. It can buy you political control and influence. It can just about buy you anything. And then somebody's going to say, well, money won't buy you love. Crazy. How many old guys my age you've seen that look like a toad and they're walking around with this beautiful gal? Hallelujah. Hello? Come on. With the first wife, he had a 2-week honeymoon, but with this one, he's on his 3rd year. Praise God. So don't say he can't buy you everything. Hello? But one thing he can't buy you, and he can't buy you eternity.
That's right.
So, with that in mind, there are 2 meetings that I believe that basically, honestly, I mean, all this room should be in one or the other. And the one is the Statesman, having to do with, and Dennis Peacock will be leading that. And the other one is League Global 360. The Statesman is basically helping raise up